Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Excited to have you back here. As you see, I have a special guest that I'm going to introduce in just a moment, but I want to welcome you to Leading in the Moment with Geronda. And as mentioned, if those of you who have watched this before, Leading in the Moment, it's a live series that's scheduled on the second and fourth Wednesday of every month. And we cover strategies, tips, resources, storytelling to develop and support leaders to building more psychologically safe spaces for their teams and inclusive organizations. So if you are with us right now and you are live, I would love for you to put live in the chat just to tell us that you're here with us. If you are watching the replay or the recording, you can also put replay because this will be recorded and available after the fact. So, who is this lovely person that is anticipating and waiting to have a fantastic conversation with us today? So, this is Nancy Settle Murphy. Thank you so much for joining us. Nancy is the president. Oh, yes, thank you so much. And she's the president of Guided Insights. And we've had a little bit of a conversation before we even came on it to go live, and we were just having some really cool discussion. So I'm excited for you to hear what we're going to talk about today. But Nancy helps distributed teams work more effectively by helping leaders and members alike to find new ways to build trust, cultivate relationships, and collaborate more successfully across time zones, cultures, and distances. Because as you can imagine, many of us are now remote all over the world, and global teams are really important. And she's also a renowned expert in the fields of virtual and hybrid leadership, remote collaboration, and navigating cross cultural differences. And she's also the author of Leading Effective Virtual Teams, published by CRC Press. And she's a frequent contributor to articles, blogs, white papers, and newsletters, including her own online newsletter, which is Communique?
Communique.
Communique. I thought it was Communique. I was going to say that too. Should have went for it. But thank you so much for being here, Nancy. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Excited to have you.
And
Perfect. So,
it's really exciting to be here. I can't wait to dive into our discussion.
oh yes, me too. When Nancy and I connected, I had put a post out there on LinkedIn because I was telling all of you I want to get more people to join these LinkedIn lives and give different varying insights and perspectives. And Nancy just jumped right on it and was like, I'd love to participate. And I was like, awesome. And then I saw that she participates and works with navigating cross cultural differences. And I was like, yes, we need to have Nancy here on this call today. So I'm excited to go into the topic. But many of you, as you know, if you've joined before we go into the topic, I always like to ask a question of the day. So I will ask the question. Nancy, I would love for you to give your answer as well. So the question of the day today is, what was your favorite part of your day? So I can go first, and I can then can give it to you, Nancy. But my favorite part of today, I actually had the day off because yesterday my partner and I we went to an appointment in New Hampshire, a neurology appointment, and I took the day off because we weren't sure we were going to stay overnight or not. But I got to spend the day with my wife, which was super nice, and it was just like work free. We spent the day together, hung out, and we're going to continue all the fun and hanging out after the call. So that was my favorite part of the day. But what about you, Nancy? What was your favorite part?
Well, just about an hour and a half ago, I went to take my dog for a walk up the street, and I ran into our neighbor family who have 2 dogs and 3 kids who my dog and I adore. So we got to actually spend maybe a half hour unexpectedly with the dogs and the kids and the parents playing or talking.
Ooh.
So that was great.
That's so nice, so nice. And what kind of dog do you have?
She's from Abilene, Texas, and we got her at a shelter. And 3 of her litter mates had their families did DNA, and it's all over the board. Probably Boxer is one, but she looks like she's got a black muzzle. She's a real beauty, but she's big girl.
Oh, awesome. Oh, I love that. I love that. I have a dog as well, so I'm just a I have a big heart when it comes to animals. All right. So thank you so much for answering the question. You can answer the question in the chat as well. If you are just joining, you can put live in the chat, or if you're watching the replay, put replay. But now I want to get into the meat of our conversation today. And the topic that we're exploring is it's going to be establishing trust in a virtual world with global teams. And as I mentioned earlier, we are going remote. There's people who can work in so many different parts of the world. We are working at global companies. And so bringing Nancy on as this amazing expert, the first question that I would love to ask you, Nancy, is when you think about globally remote teams, how do you navigate those cultural differences with those teams and establish kind of the foundations of trust in that virtual environment?
Great question. I'd say first and foremost, don't ignore the differences. I think the temptation for many people is to say things like, well, we're all human at the end of the day. We're not really that different. And to me, that causes a lot of problems because in reality, there are cultural differences that really affect teamwork. And especially when we work virtually and we have no way to really it's much harder to bridge the differences and to even identify the differences. So I'd say, first of all, acknowledge that there are differences. I'd say also have an honest discussion with your team about which differences seem to be inhibiting teamwork. So it might be, for example, Germans and Swiss and Austrians on the team have a very different feeling about punctuality than maybe my colleague in California or in Chile, for example. So
Right.
I think to be open about educating each other about our own cultures and also to be curious about each other's cultures in a non-judgmental way. I think that's super important. And then once you've had those discussions as a team, agree on what your principles will be in terms of, let's say, giving feedback or timing, punctuality, reporting, status reporting, etc. So those are just some of the steps.
Yeah, and I love what you said about agreeing in terms of the guidelines or expectations on how you as a team are going to function. Because I can imagine that sometimes when you are meeting with clients or even as you were putting your book together, that there are times that maybe even leaders might want their teams to just acclimate and do things that are related to their culture. So like, oh yeah, you may be from Chile or you may be from China or you may be from this area, but this is how we do things here and I want you to do things here. Do you see that happening sometimes?
I see that happening more, I'm going to say, with Americans that and I think big part of it is that Americans tend to be more ethnocentric because many of us haven't lived overseas. Many Americans haven't even been outside the country, whereas people in other countries, it's so much easier to go from, let's say, Germany to France in a half-hour drive, for example. So I think we are more used to having a singular culture and more used to expecting the business world around the world to accommodate our style. And I'm generalizing here a lot, but I do
Right, right.
think, for example, when Americans work in another country, for example, they may not understand that giving feedback and getting feedback is very different in, say, France or Israel than it is here.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, you're saying you're generalizing and not to this is not at all talking bad about Americans or America,
No,
but
not at all.
Yeah, it can definitely happen where you kind of are, you're comfortable where you are, you're comfortable in how you operate, and you may feel that others could operate similar to you. So um I love what you said about like really understanding the difference before, because I really think understanding the difference of one another is like the foundational start to be able to build that trust.
Yeah, I'm thinking I I spent some time in Hong Kong in the early 90s. And I remember some of the cultural differences that me being a fairly ethnocentric American, even though I had traveled a lot, for example, a belief in luck, being
Mm.
very superstitious that was something that I just couldn't get over. Like, how could you think this is all luck? But then I
Yeah.
realized, wait, this is part of their culture, and who am I to impose my beliefs? It's more important to be curious and to understand and to find out how do those cultural differences kind of play out in the workplace or in our relationships.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, you had me pause for a second when you I thought you like did time in Hong Kong, and I was like, well, tell me how that was. How did you make it? That's all good though. It's all good. Yeah, and it goes into something else that we talked about, which is understanding those differences. Even virtual communication is important. And so when in thinking about in the world where we are virtually communicating all the time, we're on Zoom calls, we're chatting with each other in, Slack or different platforms. So what are some strategies that you, or even tools that you found really effective in building and maintaining that trust, um, who may never really meet face to face? So I say this because you mentioned that we have to understand our differences, but then it's hard to really meet each other um, face to face. So how do you continue to have that communication?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's hard enough to navigate the differences when I can see the look of confusion on your face when I say something, or I can read something from your body posture, for example, that may not be explicit. So in a virtual world, yeah, it's a lot more challenging. It's like this additional overlay on top of the challenges that are already inherent in building trust when we can't see each other. But I'd say, well, a few things. One is, if you can at all, even once a year, get together in person. And if it's a huge global team and it's simply not affordable or just not possible, then consider having, let's say, regional groups or functional groups meet. So if you can't have the whole team, have everyone meet, but perhaps locally. I think it's that the face-to-face communications, even if it's one day, does more to build trust over time than anything else. I Just as a quick example, before I went to Hong Kong for work, I was trying to invite myself to the Asia Pacific regional headquarters to provide some training, and they really weren't very responsive. And then I got to go drop in there literally on a business trip. I scheduled a stop in Hong Kong, and once we just had dinner together, just one time, suddenly we were best friends, and they asked me to come over for a much longer period. So I think that face to face, even if it's small, is huge. Um, but let's say you either can't do that or you do that once a year, then I'd say some other things I like to do is, as a leader, assign a task or a project for small groups of people where they can get to know each other and exchange information about the skills and knowledge they have about a project, maybe share some of their cultural uniquenesses, and just get to know each other. It's very hard to build trust with a large, when I say large team, maybe 10 or more people meeting every week or every 2 weeks. It's really hard. You need to break it into smaller conversations, I think. Um, and then if you're team spans multiple time zones. So let's say one of my clients has one group in California and one in Cambridge, England, and a few areas in between. Find that time, which that client calls the golden hour or golden hours, where everyone on the team within reason is available. It might just be a 1 hour, 2 hour window a day. But beyond that, set up many opportunities for asynchronous communications so that people can drop in when it's convenient for them. And one thing I love some of my clients who use Slack do, they set up social channels, so social chats. So there might be a thread related to a particular project. There might be one related to dogs, one related to best places to eat in Boston, so that people can feel free to have these ongoing conversations that don't necessarily have to do with work.
Yeah, I love so much of what you said. And there's a lot of really great things to unpack there, which is if you, because it's true, meeting even just once in person with your team or as a company, it makes such a difference. And I say that because so I work for an organization full time as a program manager for DEI, and we have people across 18 different countries, and we have, yeah, and it's we're across different regions, we're across Europe, West Asia, Africa, and the Americas, but we have our in-person summit where everyone can come together and meet one another. And I have yet to go to one. I will go to one because I've been with the company for about 2 years now, almost 2 years. And when I first started, I had an opportunity to go to one, but my passport did not come in on time. Was ready to go to another one, and then I had a whole situation that happened, and I was like, the next year is when it's going to happen. But everyone loves it. Everyone talks about how amazing it was to meet this person that they worked on a project with, but like never met them in person, and learned all these different cultural nuances and backgrounds, and holidays they celebrate and traditions, and it's just such a great time to come together. And like you said, in Slack, when you talk a lot about work. You're at work a majority of your life, but when you're there, we have like you said, we have the dog channel, the cats channel, we have adulting. Like, what is it like to pay the bills, and can we all just complain about like how much we have to pay in taxes and things? And it's open to everyone, so it just brings different levels of understanding of how things might be different, or how we have so many different commonalities as well. So I love what you said about all of them coming together. Yeah, it was so good. And that comes a question I have too, because we
And I
talk about.
think just to build on what.
Oh no, you go ahead. Oh, you go. You can go.
Oh, you go.
Okay, so I'll just add this one
No, I
point.
was just going to say, to build on what you were talking about.
Go ahead.
It's funny. I think there's a time lag, I think, between us. That's reality.
Yeah. Yes, go right ahead. You're going to build on something.
Okay, yeah. So to build on the point you made, when you do get together, if you're lucky enough to, make use of the time and to do things, have conversations, have activities that you can't do virtually, instead of using the time together by showing a bunch of presentations that could have been an email. So devote all or the great majority of time to conversations and group activities.
Yes, that's a very, very great point. I think that sometimes we do tend to want to use it as an opportunity to go through some work discussions or projects, or like how things are going, and maybe that could be a very, 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 very small portion. but you do want to spend a majority of your time getting to know each other. So that's super, super important. I love what you said there. And so another question I want to get into with you in thinking about communicating or in a virtual environment, we may not be able to be face to face. And thinking about like giving feedback, I would love to hear some tips or strategies for having a virtually global remote team, um, and how you can work on giving feedback in different forums.
Well, that's a great question. Different cultures accept and give feedback very differently. And so this is one area where I strongly advise a manager who either is managing a team with different cultures or is an expat going to work in another country to find out how that culture, the person in each culture, is likely to want feedback. So, for example, I've done a lot of cross-cultural training with American, German, and French groups, all three together for one client over a period of many years. And the Germans and French said that the American managers confuse them because we Americans tend to give, oh, let me give you a little positive feedback. You're doing this great, but here's what I'd like to do you to do differently. So that's confusing to cultures where I remember one French employee said, I know what I'm doing well. You don't need to tell me. Just tell me if there's something I need to change. So they didn't understand our whole style of giving feedback. Whereas as I said before, I used to live in Hong Kong. I've done a lot of work in many different countries in Asia. And there's no uniform Asian country, but I'd say, let's say Japan and Korea in particular, the feedback that they would prefer and that you want to give is much more subtle in a way. So I think giving feedback is super important to know the cultures. And then regardless of cultural differences, it's and if you're assuming we don't have face-to-face in-person time, it would be to set up time in advance. Do not have a device going, have everything cleared, maybe a pen and paper, take notes, have really good questions to ask, be curious, and be as specific as you can, and be as quick as you can in giving feedback rather than waiting 10 days to say, here's what I don't think you did well 10 days ago. So all that really doesn't matter what culture it is, but I think the cultural differences are more about direct versus indirect, and what your employees or your managers, what each other's styles are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds like what may be helpful too to add on to that is as you are building trust with your teams, getting to know your teams more, it can be also asking the question of how do you prefer to receive feedback? Would you say that's correct too?
That's a great point. Yes, and how do you prefer to be communicated to? How would you like to get feedback? How would you like to, let's say, what is the best way to contact you in the case of an emergency or an urgent situation? If an issue is escalating, is email best to contact you, or would you prefer text or phone? So I think for any virtual team, regardless of cultures, to have that conversation as a team is super important, and then between leader and team member.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I didn't even consider the question of in an emergency, like, or if we need you, what is the best way to contact you? Because it can vary depending on your preferred method of communication.
And the timing too. If I have an urgent need, what is the best time I can expect to reach you and get you on the phone, let's say, because many of us have flexible hours now, and I might work from 7 a.m. my time to noon, take off 3 hours to be with kids or to go to the doctor's appointment, and then come back online till 8 at night my time. That may change day to day, or there might be a regular cadence that's important to be aware of.
Yeah, yeah. It's even like, for example, and it's nothing at all about global teams, but it relates to the topic. Um, when my family, I always say, if it's an emergency, call me. Um, if it's something that can wait and you just are curious about something, you can text me or email me. But especially when I'm at work, I do best when you send me an email, um, versus if you are like pinging me pretty frequently through Slack or another chat function, because I get very distracted and I will immediately be like, okay, well, what is this? And I'll lose my whole train of thought of the things I'm looking to do. So even just communicating those simple things can go a really, really long way.
Yeah, and just when you just mentioned getting interrupted, so that I've seen many pieces of research all pointing to that if we are interrupted, either because we chose to answer that email or look at the text, or someone taps us on the shoulder, calls us, it takes up to 23 minutes to get back to where we were, to try to replicate the thinking process, to try to remember what we were doing, etc., before the interruption. So interruptions are really costly. And so for teams, I know teams that will have, say, a norm is put on your calendar when you need to do deep work. Put that right in, deep work. And I know if I'm trying to book a meeting with you, that is that's a no go zone. That's something that's sacrosanct. So I think the more teams as a group decide on principles about when it's okay to interrupt, what a big one is, what level of responsiveness can I reasonably expect from my team member? That's
Ooh.
one of the biggest causes of, I'd say, frustration and distrust. If I think that you're dissing me, but you know that you're going to answer me, but you can't do it for 3 or 4 hours, there's a big disconnect there. And I think teams need to talk about that.
Yes, for sure. Oh, for sure. That's so good. Um, and another question I have for you is, in thinking about examples or case studies where trust was successfully established, or even it was rebuilt with a virtual global team, what would you say are key factors that contributed to that success?
Well, I'm going to give you a real life example. I was facilitating a retreat for CIO in Massachusetts, and he was having, it was about 40 to 45 of his managers from around the world were coming. And he asked me to interview some of the managers in Massachusetts and some in India, because he said they were actually considering getting rid of the full-time India team and hiring an agency, because they felt that the Indian team was promising everything and not delivering as they should. Meanwhile, then when I interviewed the Indian managers, they said the American managers were asking for these ridiculous deadlines that everyone thought could never be met, but they just said yes because they figured maybe they can pull it off somehow, or maybe these American managers will forget they asked for that because it's such a ridiculous deadline. Who can take it seriously? So that was going on, and they were really at loggerheads. Then when we came together in a room, maybe a month later after I did the interviews, I showed one slide from a book called The Culture Map by Aaron Meyer, which I highly recommend.
Mhm.
And it showed that there are certain cultures that build trust primarily by, did you deliver something on time? Did you check the items on the checklist? And there are other cultures way on the other side that were much more about, have we built a relationship? Do you know me? Do I know you? If yes, then we can work together. So I showed that slide in this room, which was mostly American and Indian managers. There were a few from the UK. And I hid the countries and I said, guess where America falls, guess where India falls. And then I did my reveal, and there was dead silence and then laughter, because they realized that was the issue. They had different ideas for how to build trust and what was important. And that started a conversation. I mean, to be honest, I haven't followed them, so I don't know what happened after. But I do know that for the rest of that retreat, they were all buddy and talking and laughing together.
Wow. It seems like it's common, and it's unintentional in some ways in how we assume a culture or someone might behave, might view something, might define something. And the fact that you were able to kind of bring it to light in a very very serious but empathetic way, and have them realize like, oh wow, we were way off base on this, just help to bring a better understanding.
Yeah, and to add to that, it made it less personal, like less about you Indian leaders or you American leaders, and more about, this is our culture. These are the cultures that we've been brought up in. This is what influences our thinking, our communication style, our decision making. And to your point, let's not make uncharitable assumptions. Let's be curious about cultural differences, and let's understand why we're at loggerheads if we are, or why we've reached an impasse. And to do that in a non-evaluative way, but a very curious way. I think curiosity without judgment is so important.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the very, very important understanding or distinction, is curiosity without judgment. Because then it doesn't become curiosity anymore.
Right. It's because stereotypes, I always distinguish between stereotypes and generalizations. So to me, a generalization is about, let's say I've learned enough, I've studied, let's say, the French culture, for example. I can make some generalizations without evaluation. So I might say French people typically enjoy a very spirited conversation. Now, a stereotype to me is much more evaluative and judgmental. So looking at French folks again, I might say French people like to pick fights.
Right.
Well, they're very different. Those comments and those perceptions are very different. One is born more of curiosity and like, hey, they like a spirited conversation. And so that's good for me as an American to know when I'm going to go present to a French group. And if I say they like to pick a fight, I'm probably going to go in with my fists up, like ready to duke it out. And that would not be appropriate.
Probably not. Probably not. Yeah, that's very helpful distinction there. Thank you for that. And yeah, it's I really liked the way you described like a stereotype versus that curiosity without judgment, because the stereotype is definitely those generalizations that you make. It's not where you want to go. It can lead to so much distrust, and it can also lead to a lot of challenges for the person that is being judged. Excuse me. So, thank you.
Yeah, one other thing I want to say is I started at the beginning saying that I think when people say, oh, we're all the same, and why are we trying to point out the differences? Let's look at our commonalities. One reason that's harmful is because when you assume similarities, we tend to look at the world through our perspective. So if I assume you and I are similar, then I'm going to assume you do things my way, or you have my framework for decision making. So I think if we make the assumption that there are differences and start with that, but to be curious, that's a lot more helpful than assuming, well, we're all alike. Because if we're all like, I'm going to look at it through my blinders.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Oh, so good. So good. So we're reaching towards the end, and this was a fantastic conversation. And I can talk to you about this honestly all day. But I know that viewers are like, I don't think we have time for that. And maybe this could be a part two. So thank you so much for coming. Before we close out, though, what is, I have two questions for you. What is one message that you'd love to leave for the audience?
Wow, I'd say assume differences unless similarities are proven. So assume that we're different, be curious about the differences, and don't be shy about asking each other about each other's differences. I think we like to exchange that, but we so infrequently get to have those conversations.
Yes. Oh, love that. Love that. And where can people find you if they want to connect?
My website is guidedinsights.com, and I'm Nancy at guidedinsights.com. And on my website, I think on every page, there's a place you can sign up for my free newsletter, Communique, that comes out roughly once every 3 to 4 weeks, usually having to do with virtual collaboration, cross-cultural differences, teamwork, etc.
Awesome. All right. So guidedinsights.com, email Nancy at guidedinsights.com. And then can also sign up for, I'm going to put the name here. When you go to the website, you can sign up for the Communique newsletter. So,
And I'm
awesome.
on LinkedIn. So you can look me up on LinkedIn and connect with me there as well.
Yes, exactly. LinkedIn as well. So thank you so much. Again, this is Nancy Settle Murphy, president of Guided Insights. Had a really, really great conversation that can go on forever and ever about establishing trust in a virtual world with global teams. And you know where to find Nancy. This is also going to be shared. So if there's anything you missed and you're watching from the replay, put replay in the chat. But I want to thank you so much, Nancy, for joining, being my first guest on Leading in the Moment with Geronda. Fantastic conversation, and thank you so, so much.
Well, it's been an honor and a privilege, so thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. And for everyone who's going to be joining the next one, the next Leading in the Moment is going to be on the 21st of February. I'm going to have another really great guest, but I'm not going to tell you until we get closer. So thank you for joining, everybody. Have a wonderful, fantastic evening, and we will talk soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.